I grew up in Australia, in a fairly rural area, on a cow farm. My favourite memories of being on the farm was spending time with my father on Saturday mornings. I had two younger brothers who were both asthmatics, so they didn't spend time out on the farm, which made spending time with my dad more special to me. That was the only one-on-one time that I got to spend with him.
Andrew Facey, Brooklyn's father, is a wealthy fourth-generation real estate developer in Melbourne.
When I was a kid, I thought my dad was a superhero. He took over his father's real estate business when he was 18 years old, and he expanded the business very significantly.
Brooklyn's mother is a beautiful socialite.
I had a very difficult relationship with my mother. There was the expectation that I was going to be as thin and as beautiful as what she was. And it didn't seem to matter what I did. It was never good enough for her. And it's caused a significant amount of trauma in my life.
Brooklyn wants to follow in her father's footsteps one day, but here too, she meets with rejection.
My intention was to take over the family business, but my father is somewhat old school in that he likes to keep the men in the business and the women at home.
Her dad does agree to support her financially, and Brooklyn sets her sights on college. But then, disaster strikes.
When I was 18 years old, I had a head-on collision with a truck. I had a closed head injury, my face and jaw was smashed, and I have since had 54 orthopedic surgeries to rebuild my body. I spent most of the year either in a wheelchair or on crutches, but I managed to get through that year at college.
Brooklyn eventually finishes her degree, but rethinks her future.
I couldn't spend time standing and on my feet all day, which is what's required if you're in real estate. One of the things that interested me was esthetician. So I did a course in that, and then I opened my own business in a gym in Melbourne. I met my first husband at the gym after one of the surgeries. After my car accident, I felt like I had been smashed into pieces, and I felt that nobody was going to want me. So as soon as somebody did come along that appeared interested in me, I feel like I kind of latched on to that.
The couple marry in 1996 when Brooklyn is 27, and she gives birth to her first son a year later.
By the time I was pregnant with my second son, I was working and I had a toddler, and my patience with my husband was really just running low. I said to him, "You're going to have to go because you're not pulling your weight."
After 5 years of marriage, Brooklyn takes full custody of her sons with minimal resistance from her ex. A year later, she's ready to dip her toes back into the dating pool.
For anyone who's been a single mother, it's an exhausting gig. And I hoped that I would find someone who would come in and be a part of the family and contribute to that. So I signed up for an Australian dating online service.
She met Paul Carter on RSVP, the online dating site. He came across to her as very available. He was single, unmarried, without children, and looking for love.
So the next night I went on my first date with Paul Carter. And that was a date with destiny, to say the least. Paul showed up in a bright yellow sports car, and that epitomized Paul's personality. He was flashy, he was showy. We went out for dinner and we laughed and talked and got on great, and he was just very easy to talk to, and we just kind of clicked. He has a big personality and he is an amusing person to spend time with.
Paul is ambitious and has his sights set on a bright financial future as a real estate developer and independent business owner.
I needed a man that was going to step up, somebody that had the sort of alpha male qualities that my dad had. That's how Paul came across initially. We got romantically involved pretty quickly from that point. I had come from being married to somebody who was really not physically interested in me at all. And he was this guy, he was very sexual and a great lover. And I appealed to him. That made me feel great.
Eventually, Brooklyn introduces her sons to Paul.
My middle son was about 18 months old and my eldest son was about 4. And he got along great with them and he was happy to play with them and spend time with them, and so they thought he was great.
For 6 months, the four are spending all of their weekend time together. Eventually, work intervenes and Paul says he has to focus on some business matters.
He says that he can't see me this weekend. Okay, that's fine, no problem. I thought it was because he was trying to get stuff done. I ended up going to the South Melbourne market and I'm wandering around the market and I look up and here's Paul walking towards me hand in hand with a girl that I had no idea who she was. And he couldn't get her to let go of his hand fast enough. And I said to him, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Oh, I'm just showing so-and-so around Melbourne. She's here visiting from Canada." And I couldn't even think at that point. Like, I couldn't think of anything to say. I was left standing there like an idiot, in shock. And when I finally got to ask him about it, his explanation was, "Oh, I was holding her hand because she was scared." She was scared. He claims that she just showed up unannounced. Nobody flies from Canada to Australia on a whim. I'm not somebody that strings people out or plays games, so I wasn't at that time familiar with being played the way that he was playing me. I started to get suspicious. I couldn't understand why I was never invited to his place. So one day when he was in the shower, I pulled his driver's license from his wallet and got his address. His name on his driver's license was Paul Carter, but the address didn't really fit with the narrative that he was putting up about being this super successful guy and having all these designer brands and this flashy car. And I thought, okay, well, I'll go pay a visit and see what's going on at this house. I pull up to the house and I knocked on the door and this older man, Paul's dad, answered the door. And I said, "Is Paul Carter here?" And he said, "Do you mean Paul Cristallo?" And I said, "No, Paul Carter. This is his address." He said, "Well, Paul Cristallo lives here with his wife, Sonia, and he has 3 kids from his previous marriage." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was surreal. I have 2 little boys who are becoming quite attached to him. And there was a sideboard just inside the door and it had all these photos from their wedding, the pictures of the kids, pictures of his wife. And I felt like the ground was going to open up and swallow me.
Brooklyn Facey is reeling from the news that her new boyfriend, Paul Carter, is not the successful single man he claims to be. In fact, he's married with kids.
This was his second marriage that he was in. At that point, the first marriage, he had 3 kids. And he has a different last name. At this point, I'm starting to wonder if anything about him is real.
Brooklyn decides to confront Paul, who simply shrugs it off.
He says, Yes, I'm married, but we're separated and we're just living in the house together. It didn't sound unrealistic. I thought, this guy's got a lot of potential. He was an exciting person. He's not boring like my last husband was. In hindsight, I should have just stuck with boring.
After the painful confrontation, Paul divorces his second wife and moves into an apartment. And soon, the deception is in the rear view as he plays dad to a blended family with Brooklyn.
He had 3 young children. I had 2 young children. Their ages sort of meshed together. Every other weekend, we had all 5 of them. I loved having the kids there. It was a lot of work for sure, but my boys were happy to have playmates. Thought Paul was pretty good with helping with things around the house, and he was involved in everything that they were doing. So we had a pretty good team situation going on. It meant a great deal to me because I was looking for a partner.
In March 2003, 8 months after first meeting Paul, he surprises Brooklyn with a grand gesture.
Paul proposed to me at the beach. He got down on one knee and asked me to marry him. I was thrilled. I was so excited. He convinced me that the life that we were going to have together was going to be wonderful. I didn't really get a sense that my parents didn't like him until I said to them that we were getting married, and they were not in favour of the idea. Right from the get-go, my father thought Paul was sketchy and he couldn't put his finger on it. But, you know, I was an adult. I was in my 30s by that stage, and I was going to do what I was going to do. So we got married on St Kilda Beach in Melbourne. My father came to the wedding. My mother did not come to the wedding. We had all the kids there, all dressed up in black pants and white shirts, and it was so beautiful. And everything seemed so perfect that day. I finally felt like I had the family that I had not had for my whole life. And I was the mother in the family, and I was never going to let my kids feel lonely or sad or unloved. Just thought that was the beginning of the happily ever after. So after we got married, the first couple of years were kind of rough. I was dealing with chronic pain from my car accident, but I felt like Paul had my back. I felt like he was there for me. For the most part, he seemed to be on my team.
The couple doesn't have to worry about money. Brooklyn may be cut out of running the family business, but her dad is still supportive. They move into a bigger house, and when she starts feeling healthier, they take another big step.
We decided to have a child together, and we had Mac, who is the love of my life, and he is my heart and soul.
After Mac's birth, Brooklyn and Paul buy an outdoor equipment company to run as a family business.
I was hoping that it would be something that we could work together in, and then there would be like a legacy for our kids. I was working there part-time, and I was doing the books, and Paul was selling the items, and he was very creative with his marketing, and he would start selling things on eBay. My dad injected a very significant amount of money so we could try and, make a go of it. He was trying to protect me financially, and he wanted to help Paul create something that was going to be good for us.
But after 18 months, they don't have enough cash flow to replenish their stock.
Paul was spending more money than he was bringing in. It wasn't until he was working for something that I was involved in that I got a glimpse of his poor business practices. And my dad basically bailed us out of it. So once we lost the company, my dad then had that over me. And I was going to hear about that forever and a day, that he had saved me and that otherwise we would have been bankrupt. Paul really did a good job of putting a wedge between us.
In 2010, Paul was appointed the CEO of United Housing Victoria, which is a publicly funded community housing company, and there he ran big sort of multi-million-dollar construction jobs.
The organization provides housing for low-income families.
He manages to pull this great job with United Housing, a very secure job, paying very well, and I'm thinking, great, everything's back on track now. I had no idea that he was doing anything wrong at the time.
He was let go after 2 years because they saw they were just hemorrhaging money. The suspicion was that Paul was blowing out the contracts of these construction jobs and pocketing that money.
Brooklyn and Paul have huge mortgage payments for the house they own together, and their debts are mounting because of Paul's excessive spending.
I was panic-stricken, and Paul's way of placating me was to say, I'll just pick up extra jobs on the side. We were in a bad place in our marriage. We ended up having to sell the house. My dad was furious. He was telling me that Paul doesn't know what he's doing. I was humiliated, totally humiliated. The fact that Paul was so irresponsible with money was another reason that my dad felt that he was not a good influence on the boys and that they would be better off with their biological father. He was putting pressure on my ex-husband. My father said to him, I will pay for your lawyers and I will put the kids through school. They took me to court and they filed for custody of my sons.
The custody battle continues for 3 years.
I had run out of money for lawyers. I had no chance of winning. No chance.
Finally, in 2013, Brooklyn loses custody of her 2 oldest sons, who are now 12 and 15. Perhaps influenced by their grandfather, they choose to side with their father.
So my ex-husband, he allowed my father to do this, and he really hasn't worked a day since then. There's only one thing that I really take pride in, and that is that I think I'm a good mum. And for me to lose my kids like that was just so devastating. If it wasn't for Mac, it would have been the end of me.
But for Brooklyn, these losses are just the beginning. Brooklyn Carter is staggering from the heartbreaking loss of her custody battle.
My family, I have no connection with because they've all taken my dad's side. I've lost 2 of my sons, so all I have left is my youngest son and my husband. It would have been easier for me if I had died that day. Everything that I had tried to keep safe and everything that mattered to me had just been handed over to someone else. And I just hope that when my boys are older, they realize that I never, ever stopped loving them. For a long time, I was so focused on the court battle with my kids that I was not paying attention to my husband. He felt that he was missing out on time and energy that I should have been putting into him. He was going to motocross meetings and joining motocross clubs. He was buying cars and changing cars frequently.
Paul would use Brooklyn to subsidise his lifestyle, things like fast cars, properties, credit cards.
There was constant stress in the house. Bills needed to be paid.
Brooklyn has managed to protect a portion of her nest egg from Paul's spending, but she's concerned he might eventually drain all of her money.
I really didn't have a lot of options other than to take back control myself. And my version of that was to take my money and put it somewhere else where Paul couldn't touch it, and I knew it would be safe. So we got an E2 treaty visa, which is granted to Australians who invest into a business in the United States. We had been to Boston to visit, and I loved it there. So I bought a couple of houses and rented them out.
Coincidentally, just as Brooklyn ties up her finances with offshore real estate and her money is out of his reach, Paul comes into a windfall.
On my son Mac's 5th birthday, we were having a party at our house for him, and Paul announced to me that he had inherited a large plot of land from his grandmother, and the government were trying to buy that land because they wanted to put a highway through.
Paul explains that this land is in Italy, and the sale is slightly delayed by red tape.
He showed me some documentation, and it all looked very bona fide to me, which was incredibly exciting because he was telling me that it was worth tens of millions of dollars. And that's one of the things about Paul. He always bounces back, often bigger and better than he was before.
Brooklyn feels hope for the first time since losing custody of her oldest sons. But she's worried how their absence is affecting Mac, her youngest.
It was very difficult for my youngest son to come home every night and not have his brothers there and go to the same school and not see his brothers.
Brooklyn suggests to Paul that they move to Boston.
By this stage, he was working for himself as a builder, and he had various projects underway. He said, okay, great, we'll buy houses, renovate them and flip them and start a new life.
Brooklyn and Mac head to Boston in April of 2014.
I was still devastated about my sons, but it was easier to try and move forward when I wasn't faced with the same things every day that reminded me of them. So Mac and I are in Boston. He was happy, I was happy, and we were expecting that Paul would join us within 2, maybe 3 months. Then suddenly the communication starts to dwindle and he's not calling every day. He didn't contact me for my birthday. It didn't take long for me to question him about what was going on. So he says to me, I would finish these jobs a lot quicker if you can fund them, and then once I finish them, I'll get the final payment and then I'll repay you.
Brooklyn knows that lending money to Paul is a risk, but after 11 years of marriage, she doesn't want to give up on him.
I don't like quitters, and I don't like to quit on things myself. I'm going to stick with something until the very end. So I went ahead and gave him the money.
It won't be long before Brooklyn discovers the real purpose of the money.
It was the middle of the night, and I was woken up by Mac, who was then 8 years old, who had his iPad in his hand. So he hands me his iPad and says, "Who is this lady in the picture with Dad?" Somebody had sent him a Facebook notification. Hang on, is this an old picture of Paul? This is my husband, but I've got no idea who this woman is. Paul's wearing a black tie suit, and this blonde woman is wearing what looks like a ball gown. I had no idea when the photo was taken, who this woman was, what Paul was doing there, or what the event was. I felt sick. I felt like my whole life was spinning out of control.
Brooklyn Carter is mortified to discover pictures of her husband in the very close company of another woman.
I'm realizing that this is not an old photo from some time before my time with Paul. This is something that's going on now that shouldn't be going on.
It doesn't take long to figure out that the event is an engagement party, and the lady in red is Paul's new fiancée.
Catherine Dubois was a Melbourne woman. She was a bit of a socialite, had great friends, but love was missing, and so she went online to find that. Catherine met Paul on Tinder. Paul rocked up to that date driving a Maserati and claimed he owned a big fleet of them. He claimed to be a self-made millionaire with this big property empire across Melbourne and Queensland.
The courtship begins after Brooklyn leaves for Boston.
Catherine said it was something of a whirlwind romance. He was extremely kind, he paid a lot of attention to her, and came across as extremely committed. She decided to move in with him, and to her shock, he lived in this basic townhouse in Box Hill, which is certainly not where you'd think a multimillionaire lives. Paul had an explanation, and that was that this was a temporary place that he was living while he and his ex-partner had been building this dream home. He actually told her his ex-wife had passed away with brain cancer, so she stopped asking questions. It was about 12 weeks into their love story. Paul got down on one knee and asked Catherine to marry him, and it was an easy yes for her. Catherine owned a beauty bar just outside of Melbourne, and it was to be acquired by the government to make way for a major road project. Catherine said that Paul really convinced her that he was something of an acquisitions expert, and so she was quick to transfer him power of attorney.
With Brooklyn conveniently tucked away in Boston, Paul Carter feels confident that he's safe to openly celebrate his new love. But he fails to consider the massive reach of social media.
After several months of me questioning whether he was having an affair or he was becoming more and more distant, I finally had the proof. So I called him and I said to him, "What the hell is this? What is going on?" He said that he would come over to Boston, and in the meantime we were doing counselling over the phone and trying to figure out if this was at all salvageable.
In Australia, Catherine Dubois receives a very similar shock.
After Catherine and Paul's engagement party, she receives a call from somebody who knows Paul. And they tell her, he has a wife and child in the US. You need to end this. Catherine now believes that he was trying to take over the beauty salon that she'd transferred into his name.
Paul and Catherine break off their relationship, and in November 2014, Paul heads off to Boston and attempts to patch up his relationship with Brooklyn.
He was able to convince me that he was remorseful for what he had done. I'd already been through a divorce and lost my kids. I wasn't going to risk doing that again and losing my youngest son. So I was going to do whatever I had to do to make it work. I still felt like I could pull out the defibrillator once again and restart the heart and try and get things back on track.
On a romantic trip to New York City for Brooklyn's 46th birthday, Paul tells her he wants to renew his commitment to her.
We had a lovely weekend in New York City, and he had organised with a jeweller to look at some diamonds because he was going to get a ring made for me.
But within weeks, it becomes clear she'll never get that diamond ring.
The money hasn't been transferred to the jeweller. No money has come into our accounts. I had faced about as much humiliation as I could take at this point. I was really losing faith in Paul. But I want to be able to say to my kids that I gave it my best shot. I didn't just quit because it got too hard. I just wasn't prepared to lose all that money and then find out a couple of weeks later that he inherited tens of millions of dollars from his grandmother.
Paul has one more gambit to keep Brooklyn happy.
Early 2018, we took over a lease on a horse farm that we were to purchase. We had scheduled the closing to coincide with plenty of time for the money to come from overseas.
Paul spent many years convincing Brooklyn that he was to inherit, and every time this deal was due to close, there was always an excuse as to why it wasn't happening. He would go to extreme lengths to keep up the con. fake contracts written in Italian would be delivered to her door, and another time that she'd receive calls from a fake number explaining to her why this was being delayed.
With the final payment on the farm looming, Brooklyn puts pressure on Paul for some financial relief. And this turns into his breaking point.
Paul came home and said, there's no inheritance. There isn't any money coming, there's no money. I slid down the fridge and onto the floor like a cartoon character. The whole game was up.
Furious and deeply betrayed, Brooklyn kicks Paul out.
I was now left with this farm that I had to pay for. I enlisted the support of my dad to help figure out the financial part of it until I was able to sell my house and repay him. Fortunately for me, my father made me sign a prenup with Paul, so I didn't end up having to split our assets. Finally, I had control of my life back again from Paul Carter. Or so I thought.
Paul, cut off from his slush fund, is angry and desperate.
Paul shows up to the farm. He was really angry. And he says to me, I'm going to kill myself, but I'm going to make sure I take you down with me. And I just felt chills go down my spine.
Brooklyn Carter is finally coming clean with herself about who her husband really is, and she's terrified.
He was not in control of money, property, our child, nothing. The gravy train had well and truly stopped, and it just enraged him. I went out and bought myself a rifle. My son was sleeping with a baseball bat next to his bed. I was terrified of what might happen.
Brooklyn gets a restraining order, and then finally, after 16 years of marriage, she files for divorce.
I couldn't lose any more money, I couldn't lose any more sleep, I couldn't be any more miserable. I thought, if I don't do something now, I'm not even going to have the energy to get out of this marriage.
In August 2019, the divorce becomes final, and Brooklyn gets full custody of Mac.
I couldn't hold back my emotion, and I burst into tears, and my head fell onto the desk in the courtroom.
But there is just one problem.
I became increasingly concerned about being on the same visa as Paul Carter. I decided I needed to get Mac and I a new visa. My very close friend suggested that we get married because we both had no intentions of ever remarrying in our lives.
Brooklyn and her female friend hold a garden wedding in Albany in September 2019.
She was going to come and live at the house that I had built at my farm, and we were just going to grow old together and help each other out and be companions for each other.
Before the couple can even move in together, Brooklyn's life takes an unforeseen turn.
I get a call from 60 Minutes Australia.
He may look like an ordinary bloke, but this is one of Australia's most cunning con men, a ruthless operator who's fleeced millions from family, friends, the rich and the poor.
60 Minutes seemed to have even more information about things that he had done that I had no clue about.
We gave him the moniker the Casanova con man because his biggest cons were of women he made believe that he loved them.
Paul Carter.
They tracked him down at a job site, which was a very rewarding moment to see because they made him come down off the roof and it was just perfect.
Why would you tell Catherine that your partner had died of brain cancer?
Yeah, that was a mistake. I was going through a bad time with my then wife and it was just a mistake.
They knew about the Uniting Church fiasco and they just had facts and figures and numbers on different projects that he was doing. He hadn't had time to prepare any answers, but he still denied everything.
So I keep hearing this, but I don't know who you're talking about.
He's just deny.
What about the Italian inheritance that didn't exist?
There isn't one.
Was that another mistake?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
After the expose, Paul Carter becomes the subject of a Homeland Security investigation.
He had engaged in these fraud schemes for many years with almost no law enforcement intervention. We were able to determine that he had used multiple identities. At that time, his most recent name is Paul Hamilton. We execute a search warrant at his residence. We found a law diploma under the name of Paul Hamilton. We found a document that was fraudulent from the Department of Homeland Security indicating that he had been awarded United States citizenship. We found military uniforms in his closet. We found a document indicating that he was the beneficiary of over $30 million in trust funds. All of these items were in line with what the underlying allegations were about him. We immediately arrested Paul Carter. So we took him into custody on the felony charges of visa fraud and false statements.
This should have been the end of Brooklyn's nightmare with Paul, except that her marriage to him has put her under the microscope of Homeland Security as well.
A couple of months later, it was about 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and there's a knock on the door. Brooklyn, we need you to open the door. It's Homeland Security.
The execution of the search warrant at Brooklyn's house was specifically in regard to the allegations of marriage fraud against her.
They're bashing on the door. Open the door, Brooklyn. So I opened the door, and 8 agents in bulletproof vests with guns stormed through my door and up the stairs. They took all our cell phones and computers, took my son's gaming computer, everything that they could get their hands on, and sent it to Quantico to get analysed.
Brooklyn is suspected of committing marriage fraud with her wife in order to gain a green card.
I was not prepared to drag her or her family through the mud with the government. This was supposed to be a happy situation for both of us.
Brooklyn divorces her wife in June 2020.
They never charged me with marriage fraud, but it was enough for them to then look at the ESTA form that I'd filled in and decide, oh, well, that's not right either. There was a felony charge for filling in the ESTA while I was still in the United States.
Brooklyn Carter ultimately pled guilty to making false statements on the ESTA application, which is utilized to re-enter the United States at some point.
Paul Carter also faces his day of reckoning in a federal court, and despite the many allegations, he too is charged with visa fraud on April 7th, 2021, and held in an Albany jail.
Paul Carter was sentenced to time served and a $5,000 fine. We were not, as an agency, pleased with the sentence, but he's now a convicted felon, which in part is based on the work that our agency and our office did.
His deportation hearing has been delayed, and now he has moved to the other side of the country and applied for a green card. So it seems that he's bought himself another couple of years of stalling techniques.
I think based on his history, it's likely that he'll come back around. I'd be surprised if we haven't heard the last of Paul Carter.
Meanwhile, because of Brooklyn's conviction, she must leave the United States. A huge disappointment, but there is a silver lining. A man named Sean Donahue.
I heard that she had to leave the country, and I said, I'm gonna marry you, and I'm gonna get your son away from Paul. And if he'll have me and you'll allow it, I'm going to adopt him and make him a Donahue.
I can't overstate how wonderful he has been to Mac and I. He's the happy ending that we deserve. I've brought chaos to this man's life, and he's still there standing right beside me. And I believe he will be till our dying days.
We're happy as can be now. We are not going to let anybody shatter our marriage. And I'll be with Brooklyn as soon as I can in another country at the soonest available time.
I've been dragged through the gates of hell to get to the happy ending. I've come out the other end. It's going to make a good story for my grandchildren, that's for sure.
The desert keeps its secrets better than almost anywhere else in America. Under the endless California sky, where the wind smooths away tire tracks and the sun bleaches every forgotten object into silence, time has a way of swallowing evidence. Days become months. Months become years. Bones become part of the landscape. A shallow grave can disappear beneath drifting sand so completely that a person could walk within a few feet of it and never know an entire family was lying beneath the earth. On a cool November morning in 2013, a recreational dirt bike rider crossed a lonely stretch of the Mojave Desert. There was nothing unusual about the ride. The engine echoed across empty hills, bouncing off dry washes and scattered Joshua trees. The landscape stretched in every direction with almost unnatural stillness, interrupted only by abandoned mining roads and patches of brittle desert brush. It was the kind of place where people came looking for solitude, not answers. Then something caught the rider's eye. At first it looked like another piece of pale rock protruding through the sand. The desert was filled with strange shapes carved by years of wind and heat. But this object was different. Its smooth curve did not belong to stone. As he moved closer, the silence around him seemed to grow heavier. It was a human skull. Within hours, investigators surrounded the area. The quiet desert transformed into a carefully measured crime scene. Every inch of disturbed soil was photographed. Every footprint was documented. Archaeologists and forensic specialists worked with painstaking patience, brushing away layers of dirt one handful at a time. Then came another horrifying discovery. The skull was not alone. Beneath the surface were two shallow graves. Inside them rested facets of human remains. An adult man. An adult woman. Two small children. For nearly 4 years, the world had wondered where the McStay family had gone. Friends had searched. Detectives had followed hundreds of leads. Television programs had speculated endlessly. Internet forums had built elaborate theories. Some believed the family had escaped financial problems. Others insisted they had crossed into Mexico to start over. A few imagined they had been kidnapped by a violent cartel operating near the border. The truth had been waiting silently beneath the desert floor all along. The discovery shattered every hopeful theory that had survived through years of uncertainty. This was never a disappearance. It was murder. Long before investigators knew who was responsible, the McStay case had already become one of the most baffling missing family mysteries in modern America. There had been no ransom demands. No confirmed sightings. No desperate phone calls asking for help. No financial activity suggesting a new life somewhere else. Every possibility seemed to collapse under its own contradictions, leaving detectives with little more than unanswered questions and a growing sense that something deeply disturbing had happened. What made the case especially haunting was not simply that 4 people had vanished. Families disappear in different ways. Parents leave marriages. Financial ruin drives people into hiding. Witness protection programs erase identities. Occasionally someone chooses to walk away from everything they once knew. But families do not usually leave behind unfinished breakfasts. They do not leave medication sitting untouched. They do not leave beloved dogs hungry in the backyard. And they certainly do not abandon 2 small children without taking even their favorite toys. Everything inside the McStay home suggested interruption rather than intention. It looked less like a family preparing for a journey and more like a family expecting to return in a matter of minutes. That contradiction would haunt investigators for years. The mystery only deepened because Joseph McStay did not fit the profile of someone preparing to disappear. Friends described him as energetic and ambitious. He had built a successful business manufacturing decorative water fountains, serving customers across the country. Like many entrepreneurs during the difficult economic years following the financial crisis, he faced challenges, but his company remained active. There were orders to fill, customers to contact, and plans for future projects. His wife, Summer, was devoted to their young family. Together they had built a life centered around their two little boys, Johnny and Joey. Photographs captured ordinary moments that now seemed almost painfully precious. Birthday cakes covered in bright frosting. Family vacations beneath blue skies. Two energetic children laughing while chasing each other through the yard. Nothing about those images suggested they were only days away from becoming victims in one of California's most disturbing murder cases. When people later searched those family photographs for hidden signs of unhappiness, they found very little. There were no obvious clues pointing toward tragedy. No visible warning. No unmistakable shadow behind anyone's smile. That is often what makes real crime so terrifying. The ending rarely announces itself. It arrives quietly. Almost invisibly. Looking back, investigators would eventually realize that the final 24 hours of the McStay family's life appeared almost painfully ordinary. Joseph answered business calls. Summer exchanged emails. The children played as children always do. Somewhere during those familiar routines, an invisible countdown had already begun. Perhaps the person responsible had already made a decision. Perhaps plans had been forming for weeks. Perhaps someone close enough to know the family's habits had been patiently waiting for exactly the right opportunity. Because whoever committed this crime appeared to understand far more than simple chance would allow. There were no signs of forced entry. No obvious struggle left behind. No panicked emergency calls. It was almost as if the family had willingly opened their door to someone they trusted. That possibility would eventually become one of the most chilling aspects of the entire investigation. Violence committed by strangers is frightening. Violence committed by someone welcomed into your home is something altogether different. As detectives slowly reconstructed the timeline, another unsettling pattern emerged. Nearly every answer created two new questions. The family's vehicle appeared in one location while their bodies rested somewhere entirely different. Digital records contradicted witness assumptions. Financial transactions hinted at deception while offering no direct explanation. Every discovery seemed to move investigators forward and backward at the same time. Years passed. Children who had once appeared on missing person posters grew older only in photographs preserved by grieving relatives. Birthdays came and went without celebration. Christmas decorations remained packed away in boxes that no one expected the family would never open again. Hope slowly transformed into uncertainty. Uncertainty hardened into dread. Yet despite the growing fear, Joseph's family refused to stop searching. His brother continued pushing investigators to look deeper, convinced that the official theories failed to explain the evidence. Friends repeated the same question again and again. Why would loving parents simply vanish without saying goodbye? Why leave money untouched? Why leave everything behind? Those questions echoed through police departments, television interviews, newspaper articles, and online discussions across America. The silence that followed each question became almost unbearable. Then, almost 4 years later, the desert answered. Not with words. With bones. Forensic anthropologists carefully examined every fragment recovered from the graves. The injuries told a brutal story that no missing person investigation had ever imagined. The adults had suffered catastrophic blunt force trauma. The children had been killed as well. Whoever committed these murders had not acted impulsively before fleeing the scene. This was an execution that erased an entire family. There would be no survivors left to identify the killer. No eyewitnesses. No final phone call. Only evidence. Tiny fragments scattered across years of unanswered questions. Some murder investigations begin with a body and end with a suspect. This one began with a family that seemed to disappear into thin air before slowly transforming into a homicide investigation unlike almost any other. Every mistaken assumption delayed justice. Every false lead consumed precious months. Every rumor pulled detectives farther from the truth. But somewhere inside thousands of pages of financial records, digital footprints, phone data, interviews, and forgotten business transactions, a trail still existed. It was faint. It was incomplete. Yet someone had left it behind without realizing it. The McStay family had vanished without warning, but the person responsible had not vanished at all. He continued living his life. He continued speaking with investigators. He continued conducting business. And with every passing month, he unknowingly carried pieces of the truth with him, waiting for someone patient enough to assemble them into a picture that would finally expose what happened after 7:47 on the evening of February 4, 2010, when a family's headlights disappeared into their driveway for the very last time. The town of Fallbrook sits far enough away from California's crowded cities that life seems to move at a different pace. Long before sunrise, a thin layer of mist often settles over rows of avocado groves and citrus orchards, softening the outlines of rolling hills that stretch toward the horizon. Narrow country roads wind through neighborhoods where people still wave to passing cars, where delivery drivers recognize familiar faces, and where children ride bicycles without parents worrying about the dangers that dominate headlines in larger cities. It was the kind of place people chose when they wanted distance from chaos without giving up the opportunities of Southern California. San Diego lay less than an hour to the south. Los Angeles was reachable within a few hours. Yet Fallbrook managed to preserve something increasingly rare, a quiet rhythm built around family, small businesses, and neighbors who noticed when something looked out of place. In early 2010, America was still climbing out of one of the worst financial crises in modern history. Businesses had failed. Homes had been lost. Entire industries struggled to recover. For entrepreneurs, every week felt uncertain. Customers delayed purchases. Banks tightened lending. Even successful companies had to fight harder for every contract. Against that difficult economic backdrop, Joseph McStay had managed to build something that reflected both his creativity and determination. His company, Earth-Inspired Products, specialized in custom decorative water fountains. They were not necessities people depended on for survival. They were luxury pieces, carefully designed for homes, gardens, hotels, and commercial spaces. Each fountain blended engineering with artistic design, transforming ordinary outdoor spaces into places of calm and beauty. The business demanded long hours. Joseph spent countless days coordinating suppliers, speaking with customers, reviewing designs, and solving unexpected problems. Owning a small company rarely meant working a simple 9-to-5 schedule. Every decision carried personal consequences because success or failure rested directly on his shoulders. Friends described him as optimistic even during difficult periods. He possessed the restless energy common among entrepreneurs, always discussing new projects, new ideas, or ways to improve the business. Conversations often drifted toward future opportunities rather than past disappointments. He believed hard work eventually created its own rewards. That optimism became one of the reasons investigators later questioned the theory that he had willingly abandoned everything. People who plan to disappear usually begin withdrawing emotionally from their lives long before they physically leave. Joseph appeared to be doing exactly the opposite. His wife, Summer, balanced a very different world. While Joseph focused on expanding the company, Summer devoted herself to maintaining the center of family life. She handled countless responsibilities that rarely attract public attention but quietly hold households together. Appointments had to be scheduled. Meals prepared. Laundry folded. Birthdays remembered. The ordinary routines that seem repetitive while they happen often become the memories loved ones miss the most after tragedy strikes. Those who knew Summer remembered her as warm and deeply devoted to her children. Johnny, 4 years old, had reached the age where curiosity seemed limitless. Every rock became a treasure. Every insect demanded investigation. Every question led to another. He possessed the fearless imagination unique to young children who still believed the world was waiting to be explored. His younger brother, Joseph Jr., affectionately called Joey, was only 3. At that age, the difference between brothers could disappear within minutes. One moment they competed over the same toy. The next they laughed together as though no disagreement had ever existed. Family photographs captured 2 boys whose biggest concerns involved cartoons, playgrounds, and bedtime stories. Looking through those photographs years later became almost unbearable. Investigators would eventually spend hours studying seemingly ordinary family pictures, enlarging backgrounds, examining furniture, searching walls for clues, hoping an unnoticed detail might explain what happened. Instead, they found only normal life. Birthday balloons. Children covered in cake frosting. Family vacations beneath bright California sunshine. Nothing hinted that these ordinary moments would become historical evidence. The McStay home reflected that same sense of everyday routine. Located in a quiet residential neighborhood, the house blended naturally with surrounding homes. There was nothing dramatic about its appearance. No imposing gates. No extravagant architecture. Just a comfortable place where 2 parents were raising young children while building a future together. Neighbors remembered seeing the boys playing outside. Dogs barking from the backyard. Cars coming and going throughout the week. It was exactly the sort of neighborhood where people noticed unusual activity precisely because so little unusual activity ever occurred. The family owned 2 dogs that spent much of their time in the backyard. To outsiders, that detail might appear insignificant. To investigators, it would later become one of the earliest signs that something had gone terribly wrong. Pets live according to routine. They expect meals at familiar hours. They wait near doors for familiar footsteps. When that routine suddenly stops, animals often become the first silent witnesses that something has changed. Long before police officially considered foul play, those hungry dogs were already telling a story no one fully understood. As February 2010 began, nothing suggested the McStay family stood on the edge of catastrophe. Joseph continued speaking with clients about business. Orders still needed processing. Emails continued arriving. Invoices remained unpaid. Like countless business owners across America, he worried about keeping his company moving through uncertain economic times. Financial records later revealed challenges, but challenges alone do not equal desperation. The recession had affected nearly everyone. Earth-inspired products experienced pressure like many small businesses, yet it remained operational. Customers still placed orders. Projects continued. Conversations about future work filled Joseph's schedule. Investigators later emphasized this distinction because public perception often transformed financial stress into fictional motives. People assumed debt automatically explained disappearance. Reality proved far more complicated. Meanwhile, Summer maintained contact with friends and family. She exchanged emails discussing ordinary subjects. There were no cryptic messages. No hidden goodbyes. No emotional confessions suggesting plans to vanish forever. Her conversations reflected the same everyday concerns shared by millions of parents. Children. Schedules. Family life. Nothing extraordinary. Ironically, it was this overwhelming normality that would later become extraordinary. Crime investigators often search for disruption. Sudden behavioral changes. Unusual purchases. Secret relationships. Unexpected travel arrangements. The McStay family displayed almost none of those warning signs. Instead, they appeared remarkably ordinary. Perhaps that is why their disappearance proved so difficult to understand. Ordinary families are not supposed to disappear. Especially not entire families. Especially not without leaving behind a single convincing explanation. As the first week of February unfolded, life continued according to familiar patterns. Joseph remained occupied with work. Summer cared for the children. The boys played inside and outside the house, leaving behind the scattered evidence of childhood, small toys beneath furniture, fingerprints on windows, half-finished coloring activities waiting for another afternoon. Those tiny details would remain frozen in place after they disappeared. Time would continue moving everywhere except inside that house. There is something profoundly unsettling about homes abandoned without warning. Unlike abandoned buildings reclaimed slowly by nature, occupied homes preserve moments. A coffee mug remains where someone expected to drink from it again. A jacket hangs beside the door because someone planned to wear it tomorrow. Children's toys wait patiently for hands that will never return. The McStay residence would eventually become exactly that kind of place. A silent photograph of interrupted life. Investigators entering the home later described an atmosphere difficult to explain. Nothing appeared violently disturbed. No furniture overturned. No shattered windows. No obvious signs of forced entry. Instead, the house seemed paused. The kitchen offered perhaps the clearest example. Eggs still rested on the counter. Food remained inside the home. Everyday objects sat exactly where they had been left. Families preparing long trips normally organize. Suitcases appear. Refrigerators are emptied. Neighbors are informed. Mail is collected. The McStay home reflected none of those preparations. It looked less like people planning to leave for weeks than people expecting to return before dinner. That contradiction would quietly haunt the investigation from the very beginning. Because every physical clue inside the house argued against every public theory developing outside it. Yet investigators could not simply ignore another important fact. No blood. No visible signs of violence. No obvious crime scene. Without those indicators, proving a crime had even occurred became extraordinarily difficult. Law enforcement cannot declare murder simply because people disappear. Adults possess the legal right to leave. They may choose privacy. They may relocate. They may cut contact with relatives. Until evidence proves otherwise, investigators must balance suspicion with the possibility that missing people remain alive somewhere beyond public view. That legal reality slowed the investigation in ways no one could yet appreciate. While detectives searched for answers, public imagination filled the silence. Some speculated the family had escaped mounting financial pressures. Others believed Joseph had become involved in dangerous business dealings. Still others imagined voluntary disappearance inspired by a desire for a fresh start. Each theory gained supporters. Each theory generated headlines. Each theory, in its own way, pulled attention away from the horrifying possibility waiting beneath the desert sand. Unknown to everyone searching, hoping, and speculating, the final chapter of the McStay family's story had already been written. The only remaining question was how long it would take before someone finally uncovered it. Joseph McStay had the kind of personality that naturally drew people into conversation. He was not the loudest man in every room, nor someone who constantly demanded attention. Instead, people remembered his enthusiasm. He had a habit of talking with his hands whenever an idea excited him, sketching imaginary designs in the air while describing a new fountain, a future business opportunity, or another improvement he wanted to make. Those who worked with him often said that Joseph was always thinking one project ahead, convinced that persistence could solve almost any obstacle placed in front of him. His path had not been effortless. Like many small business owners, he had experienced both success and disappointment. Contracts sometimes fell through. Suppliers occasionally missed deadlines. Customers delayed payments. Every month brought new challenges that required quick decisions and long hours. Yet he rarely allowed frustration to become visible for long. Friends described him as someone who believed tomorrow could always be better than today. That optimism became contagious inside his home. The McStay residence was not a mansion hidden behind towering gates. It was a lived-in family house where signs of childhood appeared in nearly every room. Small shoes waited beside the front door. Children's books rested on coffee tables. Plastic toys somehow found their way beneath couches no matter how often they were picked up. The walls displayed family photographs instead of expensive artwork, preserving moments that seemed wonderfully ordinary at the time. Summer McStay often stood quietly behind the camera in those pictures. Unlike Joseph, who enjoyed discussing business and future plans, Summer seemed more comfortable allowing the people around her to shine. Friends remembered her kindness before anything else. She possessed the patience required to raise two energetic little boys while supporting a husband whose business demanded unpredictable hours. Running a household with young children rarely follows a perfect schedule. Breakfast sometimes became messy before 8 in the morning. Laundry accumulated faster than anyone expected. Toys migrated from one room to another like tiny explorers claiming new territory. Yet beneath that everyday chaos existed a rhythm understood only by the people living inside the home. Joseph and Summer had built that rhythm together. They balanced responsibilities in ways that made sense to them. When Joseph became absorbed by work, Summer filled the gaps. When business allowed him more free time, Joseph eagerly stepped back into family life. It was not a perfect marriage. Few are. But investigators later searched relentlessly for evidence suggesting serious conflict and found remarkably little. There were disagreements, naturally. Financial pressure touched almost every household during those difficult economic years. Running a business placed constant stress on Joseph. Managing a family required endless patience from Summer. Still, those who knew them never described a marriage collapsing under hidden resentment. Instead, they described two parents focused primarily on giving their children a stable and happy childhood. 4-year-old Johnny embodied endless curiosity. At an age when every ordinary object could become part of an imaginary adventure, he transformed living rooms into castles, backyards into jungles, and cardboard boxes into spaceships. His questions arrived one after another with breathtaking speed. Why is the sky blue? Where do birds sleep? Can fish get thirsty? Parents often laugh at questions like these because they reveal a child's innocent attempt to understand a complicated world. Joseph enjoyed answering them. Sometimes seriously. Sometimes by inventing playful stories that made his sons laugh. Little Joey, only 3 years old, looked up to his older brother while simultaneously trying to keep pace with him. The difference between 3 and 4 may seem insignificant to adults, but during childhood it feels enormous. Johnny often wanted to lead every adventure. Joey eagerly followed behind, occasionally insisting on creating adventures of his own. Together they filled the house with constant movement. The sound of tiny footsteps echoed through hallways. Laughter drifted from bedrooms. Arguments over toys lasted only minutes before disappearing completely. Anyone visiting the McStay home encountered the unmistakable atmosphere created by young children, a mixture of joyful noise, unpredictable messes, and endless affection. Those ordinary sounds would eventually become painful memories for everyone who knew them. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of homicide investigations involving families is the way detectives gradually learn intimate details about lives that ended far too soon. Investigators examined birthday photographs, holiday videos, school records, medical appointments, family calendars. Each document served a practical purpose during the investigation. Yet together they also revealed something much more personal. A life interrupted. Joseph's work frequently brought people into and out of his daily routine. Customers visited. Suppliers called. Business partners discussed ongoing projects. Earth-inspired products depended heavily on trust. Many agreements began not with lengthy legal contracts but with conversations between people who believed they could rely upon one another. Trust became the foundation upon which the company operated. Ironically, investigators would later wonder whether that same trust ultimately exposed the family to unimaginable danger. Joseph generally preferred maintaining positive relationships. He disliked unnecessary conflict. Business associates recalled that even during disagreements he usually searched for compromise before confrontation. That tendency earned him respect. It also meant he occasionally gave people second chances when others might have walked away. Whether that characteristic represented kindness or vulnerability would become one of the central questions surrounding the case. Summer's world revolved less around business and more around relationships. Friends remembered frequent emails discussing everyday life. Recipes. Children. Weekend plans. Nothing dramatic. Nothing secretive. Her communications reflected exactly what one might expect from a mother balancing countless daily responsibilities. Detectives later reviewed those emails line by line. Every sentence became evidence. Every casual remark invited scrutiny. Investigators hoped hidden between ordinary conversations they might discover a clue pointing toward fear, concern, or plans to leave. Instead they found consistency. Summer sounded exactly like herself until communication suddenly stopped. There was no gradual withdrawal. No mysterious farewell. Simply silence. The family's financial situation received enormous public attention after their disappearance. Speculation spread quickly. Some believed mounting debt explained everything. Others imagined Joseph had orchestrated an elaborate escape from creditors. Reality proved significantly less dramatic. Like many entrepreneurs recovering from the recession, Joseph faced financial pressure. Business accounts fluctuated. Payments sometimes arrived late. Expenses occasionally exceeded expectations. None of this surprised investigators. Small businesses experience uncertainty regularly. What mattered was whether those pressures justified abandoning an entire life. Evidence consistently suggested they did not. Joseph continued planning future work. Customers still expected deliveries. Business communications showed ongoing activity rather than preparation for disappearance. People planning permanent escape rarely concern themselves with next month's projects. Joseph clearly did. Outside the home, neighbors observed nothing extraordinary. Cars entered and exited the driveway. The boys played outside when weather permitted. The family appeared exactly as they had for months. This apparent normality would later frustrate detectives. Violent crime often leaves emotional ripples before physical evidence emerges. Arguments become louder. Threats are overheard. Neighbors notice tension. Friends sense fear. The McStay family displayed almost none of those warning signals. If danger existed, it remained carefully hidden. Perhaps only one other person knew it was coming. As February 4, 2010, unfolded, life appeared reassuringly familiar. Joseph spent portions of the day speaking with business contacts. Phone records documented routine conversations about ongoing work. Invoices still required attention. Customers still needed assistance. Nothing within those calls suggested someone preparing to vanish forever. Meanwhile, Summer exchanged emails with friends. The topics remained wonderfully ordinary. Daily routines. Children. Plans. The kind of conversations millions of people have without imagining they may someday become evidence in a homicide investigation. There is something profoundly tragic about ordinary days viewed through the lens of hindsight. Every decision seems significant afterward. Every conversation feels like a hidden clue. Investigators often experience this psychological trap. Knowing the ending encourages people to search desperately for warnings that were invisible at the time. Yet most tragedies arrive disguised as ordinary afternoons. Children laugh. Parents work. Neighbors wave. Nothing appears unusual. Until suddenly everything changes. Inside the McStay home, toys remained scattered exactly where little hands had left them. Perhaps Johnny planned to continue playing after dinner. Perhaps Joey expected another bedtime story before falling asleep. Perhaps Joseph intended to answer a few more business emails later that evening. Perhaps Summer had already begun thinking about tomorrow's schedule. Those plans, however ordinary, would never be completed. No calendar records the final bedtime story. No family photograph announces itself as the last one ever taken. Life simply moves forward until it no longer can. Somewhere beyond the routines of that February day, another story was unfolding. Someone else's decisions. Someone else's desperation. Someone else's hidden motives. The McStay family remained completely unaware that ordinary moments were quietly becoming their final memories together. They had no reason to suspect that familiar faces might conceal dangerous intentions. No reason to question the trust they extended to people within their personal and professional lives. That trust, invisible and unremarkable at the time, would eventually become one of the most haunting elements of the entire case. Because investigators would later conclude that whoever ended the lives of Joseph, Summer, Johnny, and Joey almost certainly understood their routines, their schedules, and perhaps most importantly, their confidence that opening the front door carried no reason for fear. As the California sun slowly descended toward the horizon on February 4th, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of Fallbrook, the McStay family continued living what appeared to be another perfectly ordinary evening. It would be the last ordinary evening they would ever know. The evening of February 4, 2010, settled gently over Fallbrook. The golden light that had washed across the avocado groves throughout the afternoon slowly faded into shades of orange and deep blue. Streetlights blinked on one by one. Families across the neighborhood gathered around dinner tables. Televisions flickered behind curtains. Dogs barked as owners called them inside for the night. Nothing about the neighborhood suggested that history was quietly unfolding behind one particular front door. For the McStay family, the day had followed an almost predictable rhythm. Joseph had spent much of the afternoon handling business matters. His phone records would later reveal conversations with clients and associates, discussions about orders, deliveries, and projects that still needed attention. There was no urgency in his voice according to those who later recalled speaking with him. He sounded focused, busy, and optimistic about work that still lay ahead. Summer moved through the familiar routine of caring for two young boys. Anyone who has lived with toddlers understands how quickly an afternoon disappears. Snacks become necessary. Toys migrate into every room. Small disagreements require patient intervention. Bedtime approaches faster than expected. It was an ordinary family evening. At least, that was how it appeared from the outside. At approximately 7:47 p.m., a surveillance camera belonging to one of the neighbors captured a brief but extraordinarily important moment. Joseph's Isuzu Trooper drove into the driveway. The recording lasted only seconds. The vehicle disappeared from view as it pulled toward the garage. No one could have imagined that those few seconds would later become one of the final confirmed sightings of the entire family alive. Investigators would replay that footage countless times over the following years. Not because it revealed the crime. It didn't. But because it marked the point where certainty ended. Everything after that moment had to be reconstructed through fragments. Phone records. Computer activity. Financial transactions. Witness interviews. Digital footprints. The timeline beyond 7:47 p.m. became one enormous puzzle with most of its pieces missing. Inside the house, life most likely continued as it always had. Perhaps dinner dishes still waited to be cleaned. Perhaps one of the boys asked for another bedtime story. Perhaps Joseph opened his laptop to finish paperwork before calling it a night. Perhaps Summer reminded the children to brush their teeth. No witness survived to tell investigators exactly what happened. The silence left behind forced detectives to imagine countless possibilities while remaining faithful to evidence rather than speculation. That evidence painted an unsettling picture. There were no emergency calls from the house. No reports of shouting. No neighbors describing loud arguments or sounds of violence. No broken windows. No alarms triggered. Nothing dramatic interrupted the peaceful evening outside. Whatever happened appears to have unfolded quietly. That single fact would become one of the greatest mysteries in the entire investigation. Because 4 people, including 2 energetic young children, do not simply disappear without creating some form of disturbance. Unless the people responsible were expected. Investigators repeatedly returned to that possibility. If Joseph answered the door, who would he willingly allow inside? Business associates. Friends. People familiar enough that neither Joseph nor Summer sensed immediate danger. Someone unknown would likely have alarmed the family. Someone trusted could walk through the front door without raising suspicion. That distinction would eventually shape the direction of the investigation years later. At some point after the family returned home, all communication abruptly stopped. Joseph's phone fell silent. Summer's emails ended. Business conversations remained unfinished. Future appointments were never confirmed. The digital heartbeat of an active family simply ceased. For investigators reviewing records years later, that sudden silence stood out more than any dramatic event could have. Modern life leaves behind an astonishing trail. Every phone call. Every email. Every bank transaction. Every internet search. People rarely notice how completely their daily routines become documented until those records are examined after tragedy. The McStay family's digital trail ended almost instantly. Not gradually. Not over several days. Almost at once. It was as though someone had reached out and switched off an entire family's presence in the world. The following morning arrived like every other Friday in Fallbrook. Neighbors left for work. Children climbed onto school buses. Traffic flowed toward San Diego. Life continued. Nobody knocked on the McStay door expecting an emergency. Nobody called police. Nothing appeared visibly wrong from the street. That normality delayed the realization that something terrible had already happened. Families often spend busy weekends at home. Parents focus on children rather than answering every phone call. Friends occasionally assume missed messages will be returned later. Hours became days. The absence slowly transformed from mildly unusual into deeply concerning. Joseph missed business obligations. Customers struggled to reach him. Friends received no replies. Family members became increasingly uneasy. Joseph's older brother, Michael McStay, sensed something was wrong long before the mystery became national news. He knew his brother's habits. Joseph might become busy. He might forget to return a call immediately. But he would not simply disappear without explanation. Concern eventually overcame patience. Michael drove to the family home. What he found immediately felt wrong. The house looked strangely still. No children playing. No movement through the windows. No familiar activity. Then he noticed the dogs. The family's 2 dogs remained in the backyard. Hungry. Restless. Waiting. For anyone who owns pets, the sight carried immediate emotional weight. Dogs measure time differently than people. They expect routines. Morning feeding. Afternoon play. Evening attention. When those routines collapse, animals cannot understand why. They simply continue waiting. Those dogs had apparently been waiting for days. Michael knocked. No answer. He called out. Silence. The growing unease hardened into fear. Eventually law enforcement entered the residence. Officers expected to discover something that would explain the family's absence. Perhaps they had left unexpectedly. Perhaps an emergency required immediate travel. Perhaps some innocent misunderstanding waited inside. Instead they found something far more unsettling. The house appeared. Paused. There was no evidence of panic. No overturned furniture. No shattered glass. No signs of forced entry. Instead, investigators encountered the unmistakable feeling of interrupted life. Eggs still sat on the kitchen counter. Food remained inside the home. Medication had been left behind. Wallets remained where they should have been. Children's toys rested on the floor exactly where small hands had abandoned them during play. Nothing suggested careful preparation for travel. Families planning vacations pack luggage. Parents gather children's favorite toys. Medication accompanies them. Financial arrangements are made. Neighbors are informed. The McStay house reflected none of those preparations. Everything pointed toward people expecting to return shortly. Perhaps after a quick errand. Perhaps later that evening. Not after several days. Certainly not forever. Investigators walked slowly through each room. Bedrooms appeared normal. Closets remained full. Personal belongings had not been systematically removed. The absence of obvious violence created a paradox. Everything inside the house suggested abandonment. Nothing suggested murder. Detectives understood immediately that they faced an unusual investigation. Without a body. Without blood. Without witnesses. Without signs of forced entry. Their options remained frustratingly limited. Adults possess the legal freedom to disappear voluntarily. Even if family members find the decision heartbreaking. Police cannot simply declare a crime because relatives feel something is wrong. Evidence must support that conclusion. At that moment, evidence remained painfully incomplete. The McStay family had vanished. That was all investigators knew for certain. As officers documented the residence, every object became important. Photographs captured rooms exactly as they appeared. Fingerprints were collected. Electronic devices examined. Tiny details received enormous attention because there were so few clues available. One unanswered question lingered above every other. If the family intended to leave voluntarily, why had they left behind nearly everything they would need? That question echoed through the investigation from its earliest days. Outside, neighbors gathered quietly. Police vehicles attracted attention. People exchanged worried conversations across driveways. Many had seen the McStay boys laughing outside only days earlier. Now officers moved carefully through the home while detectives asked increasingly serious questions. No one could imagine that the answers would remain hidden for almost 4 years. Unknown to everyone standing outside that quiet house, the truth was already buried beneath the harsh California desert. The family would never walk back through the front door. The toys scattered across the living room floor would never again be picked up by little hands. The unfinished routines of that ordinary February evening would remain unfinished forever. What investigators did not yet realize was that this was no longer a missing person case waiting for a happy ending. It was the opening chapter of one of the most haunting homicide investigations in modern California history, a case in which almost every early assumption would prove wrong, every hopeful theory would slowly collapse, and the greatest obstacle to finding justice would not be the lack of suspects, but the terrifying absence of proof that a crime had even taken place. The first investigators who stepped into the McStay home were expecting to find answers. Instead, they found questions. Every room they entered seemed to contradict the growing concern of Joseph's family. Nothing had been ransacked. Nothing appeared obviously stolen. There were no overturned chairs, no broken lamps, no shattered picture frames scattered across the floor. The house looked almost exactly as it might have looked on any ordinary evening after 2 young children had spent the day playing inside. That normality was deeply unsettling. Experienced detectives know that crime scenes rarely resemble what people see in movies. Violence does not always leave dramatic signs. Sometimes the most disturbing scenes are the quietest ones, the places where everything appears almost perfectly ordinary except for one impossible fact. The people who should be there are gone. Investigators moved carefully from room to room, documenting every detail before anything could be disturbed. Every photograph preserved a frozen moment in the family's daily life. The living room still reflected the presence of 2 small boys. Children's toys rested on the floor exactly where they had last been used. A small plastic truck sat beneath a table. Coloring materials remained untouched. Tiny shoes waited near the entrance as though someone would soon slip them on again before running outside. Nothing suggested those children had packed for a long trip. In the kitchen, detectives paused. Food still remained inside the home. Eggs had been left sitting on the counter. Dirty dishes had not been carefully cleaned and stored away. The room looked interrupted rather than abandoned. Families planning vacations normally leave kitchens organized. Refrigerators are emptied of food that might spoil. Counters are cleaned. Garbage is taken outside. The McStay kitchen looked as though someone expected to return within a few hours. Not within weeks. Not never. As investigators continued examining the residence, another important detail emerged. Joseph's wallet had been left behind. Identification. Personal belongings. Medication. Many everyday necessities remained exactly where they belonged. For detectives, this immediately weakened one of the earliest theories. People voluntarily abandoning their lives almost always take the items required to build another one. Identification is essential. Money becomes necessary. Medication cannot simply be forgotten. The evidence inside the house suggested no careful preparation whatsoever. Yet despite these troubling observations, investigators faced an enormous legal obstacle. There was still no proof that anyone had been harmed. No bloodstains. No obvious signs of violence. No witness describing an assault. No body. Without evidence of a crime, detectives could not simply transform a missing person investigation into a homicide case. The distinction mattered. Resources differ. Search warrants require different standards. Investigative priorities change. Every decision depended upon facts that remained frustratingly absent. Outside the home, Joseph's family refused to believe the disappearance had been voluntary. His brother Michael spoke repeatedly with investigators, emphasizing that Joseph would never simply walk away from everyone who loved him. Joseph had responsibilities. Customers depended on him. His business required daily attention. Most importantly, he adored his children. Friends echoed the same belief. Summer, they insisted, would never abandon her family either. The image of the couple loading two young boys into a vehicle and disappearing forever without telling anyone simply did not fit the people they knew. Still, detectives had to consider every possibility. Perhaps there had been an emergency. Perhaps they had left unexpectedly. Perhaps they intended to return. Every theory remained open because the available evidence supported none of them completely. Then another development shifted the investigation. On February 8, only a few days after the family disappeared, authorities located the McStay family's white Isuzu Trooper. It was parked near the San Isidro border crossing between California and Mexico. The discovery immediately transformed the investigation. Until that moment, detectives had focused primarily on Fallbrook. Now attention shifted nearly 100 miles south. The location of the vehicle naturally encouraged a powerful assumption. Had the family crossed into Mexico? Investigators knew that thousands of people legally crossed the border every day. Some traveled for business. Others visited relatives. Many simply enjoyed weekend trips. Could Joseph and Summer have decided, for reasons still unknown, to leave everything behind and begin a new life? The theory seemed possible. At least initially. Then investigators examined surveillance footage collected near the border. Security cameras had captured images of a family of four walking from the United States into Mexico around the time the McStays disappeared. The footage immediately attracted enormous attention. Although the video quality was poor, investigators believed the figures roughly matched the McStay family. 2 adults. 2 young children. Walking calmly toward Mexico. No visible signs of distress. No obvious struggle. For months, that footage shaped nearly every aspect of the investigation. Federal agencies, including the FBI, considered it entirely plausible that Joseph, Summer, Johnny, and Joey had crossed the border voluntarily. The possibility seemed to explain several mysteries at once. The vehicle had been left near the crossing. The family had vanished. No crime scene had been discovered. Perhaps there had never been one. Media reports soon repeated the border theory. Public discussion followed the same path. People began imagining reasons the family might have fled. Financial problems. Personal conflict. A desire to disappear. Speculation spread much faster than evidence. Yet beneath the surface, detectives continued uncovering details that quietly undermined the popular narrative. Bank accounts remained largely untouched. Credit cards showed almost no activity. There was no pattern of purchases consistent with building a new life in another country. No rent payments. No grocery shopping. No hotel records. No meaningful financial footprint. In the modern world, disappearing completely requires extraordinary planning. Even individuals attempting to vanish voluntarily usually leave traces. Cash withdrawals. Employment. Medical treatment. Communication. The McStay family left almost nothing. Investigators also reviewed passport information. Contrary to public speculation, there was no evidence that the family had formally entered Mexico using passports. Supporters of the border theory argued that passports were not always required under certain circumstances during that period. Technically, that remained possible. But possibility is not proof. As weeks stretched into months, another uncomfortable reality emerged. No confirmed sightings. Families who relocate eventually appear somewhere. Children enroll in school. Parents seek employment. Neighbors notice unfamiliar faces. The McStays simply disappeared. Their absence became increasingly difficult to explain. Meanwhile, detectives returned again and again to the McStay residence. Forensic specialists searched for evidence invisible to the naked eye. Alternative light sources examined floors and walls. Potential fingerprints were processed. Electronic devices underwent analysis. Every inch of the property was scrutinized. Yet the house stubbornly refused to reveal its secret. It neither confirmed murder nor supported voluntary disappearance. It remained suspended somewhere between the two. Perhaps the most heartbreaking evidence came not from sophisticated forensic technology but from the family's dogs. Neighbors later recalled concern about the animals being left behind for days. Dogs do not understand disappearance. They wait. Every passing hour, they expect familiar footsteps. Every sound outside raises hope. Every evening becomes another opportunity for their family to return. Those animals had unknowingly become silent witnesses to absence. Their continued presence strongly suggested that whoever left the house had never intended to stay away. If Joseph and Summer truly planned to begin a new life elsewhere, why leave behind beloved pets? The question lingered. No convincing answer ever emerged. Public fascination with the case continued growing. Television programs featured the mysterious disappearance. Internet forums filled with amateur detectives offering elaborate theories. Some insisted organized crime had become involved. Others believed Joseph had secretly staged everything. Every rumor generated fresh discussion. Very few brought investigators closer to the truth. Looking back years later, detectives would recognize that the earliest phase of the investigation had been shaped as much by what was missing as by what was found. No body. No blood. No confession. No eyewitness. Only an ordinary home preserving the final moments of an ordinary family. The apparent border crossing became the investigation's strongest lead, yet it also became one of its greatest distractions. For years, attention remained fixed on the possibility that the McStays had willingly walked into Mexico. Few imagined that while investigators searched across borders, questioned immigration records, and explored theories of voluntary disappearance, the family was already lying in shallow graves beneath the unforgiving desert landscape of Southern California. The truth had never crossed the border. It had simply been buried where almost no one would think to look. For investigators, the most dangerous moment in a long-running case is not when there are no leads. It is when there is one lead that appears convincing enough to overshadow every other possibility. The McStay investigation entered exactly that stage. The discovery of the family's vehicle near the San Isidro border crossing, combined with surveillance footage showing a family of four walking into Mexico, gave detectives what seemed to be a logical direction. The theory fit neatly together. It explained why there was no obvious crime scene inside the house. It explained why no bodies had been found. It even offered a plausible reason why Joseph's business had suddenly fallen silent. Perhaps they had simply disappeared by choice. For months, that possibility influenced nearly every aspect of the investigation. Federal agencies reviewed border records. Investigators contacted Mexican authorities. Tips poured in from people claiming they had seen the McStay family in border towns, restaurants, hotels, beaches, and marketplaces across northern Mexico. One witness insisted they had spotted Joseph purchasing supplies in Tijuana. Another believed they had seen Summer with the children at a shopping center. Every report generated paperwork. Every report demanded follow-up. Every report ended the same way. Nothing could be verified. The McStay family remained invisible. Yet despite the lack of confirmed sightings, the voluntary disappearance theory refused to disappear. Human beings naturally prefer explanations that preserve hope. Families cling to them because the alternative is unbearable. Investigators sometimes cling to them because homicide without a body is extraordinarily difficult to prove. And the public embraces them because mysteries feel less frightening when there is still a chance of a happy ending. But beneath that hope, another reality quietly emerged. Joseph's business was beginning to suffer. Customers called repeatedly. Orders remained unfinished. Emails went unanswered. Employees and business associates found themselves explaining Joseph's unexplained absence again and again. For detectives reviewing the company's records, one question became increasingly important. If Joseph had truly planned to abandon everything, why leave his business in complete disorder? Successful disappearances require preparation. Financial assets must be moved. Important documents collected. Future obligations eliminated. Instead, Earth-inspired products looked like a company whose owner had vanished in the middle of normal operations. Invoices remained open. Projects stalled. Customers waited. Nothing suggested careful planning. Financial investigators dug deeper. Bank accounts showed remarkably little activity after February 4th. No meaningful withdrawals. No unusual purchases. No evidence of someone secretly funding a new life elsewhere. Credit cards remained largely untouched. Cell phones stopped generating meaningful activity. The family's digital footprint simply ended. That silence became louder with every passing week. Detectives often describe electronic records as modern witnesses. Phones remember where people traveled. Computers remember conversations. Banks remember purchases. Even when human memory fails, digital systems preserve routine. The McStay family's routine had vanished with startling precision. Meanwhile, another theory began gaining attention. Had Joseph become involved with dangerous criminals? The location of the abandoned vehicle near Mexico encouraged speculation about drug cartels. At the time, media coverage frequently highlighted escalating violence along portions of the border. Some theorized that Joseph had unknowingly entered a business arrangement with the wrong people. Others imagined kidnapping, extortion, cross-border organized crime. Investigators explored those possibilities seriously. Any connection between Joseph's business and criminal organizations had to be examined. Financial transactions were reviewed. Business partners interviewed. Travel history analyzed. Nothing supported cartel involvement. No threats. No ransom demands. No suspicious international payments. No evidence whatsoever. Once again, an attractive theory collapsed beneath careful investigation. As months turned into years, frustration spread through every level of the case. Detectives rotated in and out of the investigation. Fresh eyes reviewed old evidence. Boxes of documents continued growing. Every interview produced another possibility. Every possibility eventually reached another dead end. The McStay family became trapped inside a category investigators know all too well. The case was active. But it was no longer moving. Still, Joseph's family refused to stop asking questions. His brother Michael remained one of the loudest voices pushing investigators forward. He repeatedly emphasized details that continued bothering him. Joseph loved his children. He would never willingly abandon them. Even if financial problems existed, walking away without contacting parents, siblings, or close friends made no sense. Michael believed something terrible had happened almost from the beginning. His certainty never faded. That persistence kept public attention alive during years when many missing person cases quietly disappear from headlines. Television producers recognized the mystery's unusual nature. Entire programs examined the disappearance. Newspaper articles revisited the unanswered questions. Internet communities dissected every known detail. People enlarged surveillance photographs, studied timelines, compared witness statements. Thousands of strangers invested countless hours trying to solve a mystery that professionals themselves could not explain. Some theories became increasingly elaborate. Perhaps Joseph had staged everything. Perhaps Summer had secretly planned the escape. Perhaps both adults had entered witness protection. Perhaps they had joined a religious community somewhere outside the country. Each idea attracted believers. Each lacked evidence. Investigators learned to separate imagination from fact. Only facts could solve the case. One fact continued standing out. The house. Every detective returning to the McStay residence experienced the same uneasy feeling. The scene simply did not match voluntary disappearance. Homes reveal habits. Small routines become visible through ordinary objects. The eggs left on the kitchen counter remained one of those haunting details. Parents planning permanent escape rarely leave groceries behind. Medication remained untouched. Personal belongings stayed exactly where they had always been. Children's favorite possessions had not traveled with them. The residence looked frozen at the exact moment normal life abruptly stopped. It resembled interruption far more than preparation. Investigators also revisited the surveillance video from the border crossing repeatedly. Technology available in 2010 had limitations. The footage lacked clarity. The figures appeared distant. Resolution remained poor. Initially, similarities between the unknown family and the McStays seemed persuasive. 2 adults. 2 children. Similar height. Similar timing. Yet experienced investigators understood an important principle. Similarity is not identification. As digital imaging technology gradually improved over the following years, experts revisited the footage with increasingly sophisticated analytical tools. Tiny details previously invisible became clearer. Walking patterns. Body proportions. Relative heights. Eventually, specialists reached a remarkable conclusion. The family captured crossing into Mexico almost certainly was not the McStay family at all. That realization carried enormous consequences. One of the investigation's strongest assumptions had quietly collapsed. Years of attention focused toward Mexico suddenly lost much of its foundation. Detectives found themselves standing almost exactly where they had begun. No confirmed border crossing. No verified sightings. No explanation. Only for missing people. Looking backward, investigators recognized how profoundly the mistaken identification had influenced the case. It had not been negligence. The technology simply had not been capable of providing definitive answers. Still, the practical effect remained the same. Time had been lost. Valuable years. Years during which evidence disappeared. Witness memories faded. Digital records expired. Potential opportunities slipped away. Yet paradoxically, abandoning the Mexico theory also reopened possibilities previously overlooked. If the family never crossed the border, then where had they gone? More importantly, who wanted investigators to believe they had? That question introduced an entirely new way of viewing the disappearance. Instead of asking where the McStays chose to go, detectives began asking who benefited from making it appear they had chosen to leave. The investigation, almost imperceptibly, began changing direction. It would take one horrifying discovery in the California desert to confirm what some investigators had quietly begun fearing. But long before human remains emerged from beneath the Mojave sand, The evidence was already pointing toward a painful truth. The McStay family had not vanished because they wanted a new beginning. Someone else had decided they would never have won. For nearly 4 years, the McStay family existed in a strange space between hope and grief. They were missing, but not officially dead. Loved ones could not truly mourn because there was always the possibility, however small, that Joseph, Summer, Johnny, and Joey were still alive somewhere. Every unidentified family seen in a shopping mall, every anonymous phone tip, every blurry photograph shared online carried the faint promise that the mystery might finally end with relief instead of heartbreak. That hope slowly became part of the investigation itself. Detectives learned to live with uncertainty. Family members learned to wake each morning without answers. The public gradually moved on to newer stories. But the desert was still waiting. On November 11, 2013, nearly 3 years and 9 months after the McStay family disappeared, a man riding a dirt bike through a remote area of the Mojave Desert unknowingly altered the course of the investigation forever. The terrain was harsh even by California standards. Miles of dry earth stretched beneath an enormous sky. Old mining roads cut through the landscape before disappearing into rocky hills. The silence felt almost unnatural. It was a place where abandoned machinery slowly rusted beneath relentless sunlight, where the wind erased yesterday's tracks before morning arrived. The rider had no reason to expect anything unusual. He was simply exploring. Then he noticed something partially exposed above the ground. At first glance, it looked almost ordinary. The desert is full of pale stones and weathered fragments shaped by decades of wind and heat. But as he approached, the object became unmistakable. It was human bone. Authorities arrived quickly. The area was immediately secured. Crime scene tape fluttered in the desert breeze while investigators carefully marked the location. Unlike urban crime scenes, where evidence often exists within buildings or paved streets, the desert demanded extraordinary patience. Every footprint mattered. Every tire track could hold significance. Even the direction of the wind became part of the investigation. Forensic specialists began excavating the site inch by inch. What initially appeared to involve a single set of remains soon revealed something infinitely more horrifying. There was one grave. Then another. The soil had been disturbed years earlier before nature slowly reclaimed it. As investigators carefully removed layers of earth, the full scale of the tragedy emerged. 4 bodies. 2 adults. 2 small children. Even experienced investigators found themselves standing silently around the excavation. Children's homicide investigations are emotionally devastating under any circumstances. Finding 2 young siblings buried beside their parents in shallow graves was something few members of the investigative team would ever forget. Identification required time. Forensic anthropologists examined skeletal remains with painstaking precision. Dental records. Medical history. Biological evidence. Every available scientific method contributed to answering the question everyone already feared. The results confirmed it. The remains belonged to Joseph McStay. Summer McStay. 4-year-old Johnny. 3-year-old Joey. Almost 4 years of uncertainty ended in a single devastating announcement. The McStay family had not disappeared. They had been murdered. News spread rapidly across California. Television stations interrupted regular programming. Newspapers updated headlines. Friends who had continued believing in a miracle suddenly faced the truth they had spent years trying not to imagine. Hope vanished overnight. Grief finally arrived. The discovery transformed every previous assumption. Investigators no longer searched for missing persons. They were now investigating a quadruple homicide. The desert itself began telling a story. The graves were shallow. They had not been constructed with professional skill. Whoever buried the family appeared more interested in concealment than permanence. The location was isolated enough that discovery seemed unlikely, yet not impossible. It suggested someone familiar with remote areas of Southern California. Someone who believed distance and silence would protect them. The positioning of the graves became another important clue. The adults and children had not been separated across different locations. They remained together. Even in death. That heartbreaking detail deeply affected many members of the investigative team. The family had lived together. Someone had chosen to bury them together. The medical examiner's work revealed another layer of horror. Although years had passed, the injuries remained visible on the skeletal remains. Joseph had suffered devastating blunt force trauma to the skull. Summer displayed similar injuries. The children's remains reflected the same brutal pattern. The weapon itself had not been recovered. However, forensic experts concluded that a heavy blunt instrument, consistent with a sledgehammer, was the most likely murder weapon. The conclusion chilled investigators. A firearm creates distance. A knife often involves panic or struggle. Blunt force murder demands repeated physical violence. It requires proximity, strength, commitment. Each blow represents a conscious decision to continue. For detectives, the nature of the injuries suggested something deeply personal. This did not resemble random violence committed during a robbery. It suggested determination. Perhaps rage. Perhaps calculation. Perhaps both. Another important question emerged almost immediately. Where had the murders occurred? The graves revealed where the family had been buried. Not necessarily where they had died. Investigators searched the burial site extensively. They hoped to find shell casings, clothing fibers, tire impressions, discarded tools, anything capable of reconstructing the final hours. Years of exposure had erased much of that evidence. Rainfall, wind, animals, and time had altered the landscape. Nature had quietly worked against the investigation every day since February 2010. Attention shifted back to the McStay home. Could 4 people have been murdered inside without leaving significant evidence? Specialists conducted additional forensic examinations. Again they encountered the same frustrating reality. The house contained remarkably little physical evidence indicating such extreme violence. If the murders had occurred there, someone had removed evidence with extraordinary effectiveness. If they had occurred elsewhere, investigators faced another mystery entirely. How had an entire family been transported without attracting attention? Each answer created another question. Despite those uncertainties, one fact became undeniable. The killer almost certainly possessed enough confidence to move for victims, transport them more than 100 miles, dig 2 graves in a remote desert, and leave without being seen. That level of organization rarely belongs to an impulsive stranger. It suggested planning, preparation, familiarity. The investigation immediately expanded. Missing person detectives were joined by homicide specialists. Crime analysts re-examined thousands of documents collected over the previous 4 years. Evidence previously considered insignificant suddenly became critically important. Financial records returned to the forefront. Business relationships received renewed scrutiny. Phone records acquired entirely new meaning. Every interview conducted since 2010 was reviewed once again. Witnesses were contacted again. Memories refreshed. Timelines rebuilt. The discovery of the graves had not solved the mystery. It had merely transformed it. Instead of asking where the McStay family had gone, investigators now asked who had benefited from making them disappear. One uncomfortable pattern soon emerged. The family had vanished almost completely without resistance. There were no public confrontations beforehand. No documented threats. No visible enemies. That absence pointed investigators toward a troubling possibility. Perhaps the killer had never needed to force his way into their lives. Perhaps he had already been there. Someone trusted. Someone familiar. Someone whose presence inside the McStay home would never have frightened Joseph or Summer. The list of people fitting that description was surprisingly short. Friends. Relatives. Business associates. Individuals who understood Joseph's schedule. People who knew the family's routines. People capable of approaching without raising suspicion. As detectives quietly assembled those names, one individual began attracting more attention than the others. At first, nothing about him seemed extraordinary. He had known Joseph for years. He had worked closely with him. He understood the business. He visited the house. He possessed knowledge that few outsiders shared. Investigators did not yet know whether he was a grieving friend or something far more dangerous. But for the first time since the McStay family disappeared, the investigation was no longer drifting through endless theories. It had found direction. And somewhere within years of financial transactions, phone records, business documents, and overlooked details, detectives believed the truth had been hiding in plain sight all along. The discovery of the McStay family's remains fundamentally changed the investigation. For nearly 4 years, detectives had searched for people who might still be alive. Overnight, every report, every interview, every financial record, and every forgotten document had to be viewed through a completely different lens. This was no longer a missing person case. It was a calculated quadruple homicide. The question was no longer where the McStay family had gone. The question was who had wanted them gone. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department assembled investigators from multiple specialties. Homicide detectives sat beside financial crime analysts. Digital forensic experts reopened computer files that had been archived years earlier. Detectives who had worked the case from the beginning compared notes with fresh investigators seeing the evidence for the first time. Sometimes distance helps reveal what familiarity hides. Fresh eyes often notice patterns buried beneath thousands of pages of reports. One principle guided the renewed investigation. Follow the money. In homicide cases involving adults, financial motives frequently survive long after physical evidence has disappeared. Bank records remember. Business accounts remember. Checks remember. Unlike witnesses, paperwork rarely forgets. Investigators returned to Earth-inspired products. Joseph had poured years of effort into building the company. The business represented not only his livelihood but also his future. If someone had wanted to profit from Joseph's disappearance, traces might still exist inside invoices, payment records, or electronic communications. The deeper detectives looked, the more one name continued appearing. Charles Chase Merritt. Merritt was far more than a casual acquaintance. He had worked closely with Joseph. He manufactured custom fountain components for Earth-inspired products and maintained regular contact with him. The relationship extended beyond business transactions. Merritt had visited the McStay home. He knew Summer. He knew the children. Most importantly, he understood Joseph's daily routines. He knew when Joseph worked. He knew where meetings occurred. He knew the financial condition of the company. He knew enough to predict Joseph's movements with remarkable accuracy. By itself, none of that made him a suspect. It simply placed him closer to the family than most people. Investigators began constructing a detailed timeline of Merritt's activities before and after February 4, 2010. The process resembled assembling a massive jigsaw puzzle. Every receipt mattered. Every phone call mattered. Every mile traveled mattered. Then detectives uncovered something deeply troubling. After the McStay family disappeared, checks issued from Joseph's business continued appearing. Several had been signed using Joseph McStay's name. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Business owners routinely sign company checks. But forensic document examiners noticed inconsistencies. The signatures did not match Joseph's authentic handwriting. They had been forged. Detectives traced the checks further. Who had cashed them? The answer repeatedly led back to the same person. Charles Merritt. Each forged check strengthened the growing suspicion that someone had attempted to keep the business operating after Joseph vanished. Not out of loyalty. Out of opportunity. Financial records painted an increasingly uncomfortable picture. Merritt himself faced serious financial problems. Court documents, debts, gambling losses, and unpaid obligations revealed a man living under significant pressure. Investigators learned that he owed substantial amounts of money. Creditors demanded payment. Financial stability remained elusive. Money alone does not prove murder. Millions struggle with debt without harming anyone. But detectives know that motive often emerges where desperation and opportunity intersect. If Joseph remained alive, financial questions might eventually expose irregularities inside the business. If Joseph disappeared permanently, those questions might never be asked. The investigation expanded further. Digital forensic specialists examined computer records connected to Earth-inspired products. Email activity. Invoices. Business communications. Metadata hidden inside electronic documents. Modern computers quietly record astonishing amounts of information. Deleted files often leave traces. Login histories reveal users. Timestamps reconstruct routines. Investigators discovered activity suggesting someone had continued operating portions of the business after Joseph disappeared. Invoices were generated. Customer communications continued. Business processes moved forward. Almost as though someone wanted clients to believe nothing unusual had happened. That strategy fascinated detectives. Rather than immediately exploiting Joseph's disappearance, someone appeared interested in delaying public realization that he was gone. Time benefits a prepared offender. The longer people believe a victim voluntarily disappeared, the less attention focuses on murder. Then came another critical development. Cell phone records. By 2013, improvements in digital forensic analysis allowed investigators to reconstruct historical location information with far greater accuracy than had been possible during the earliest phase of the investigation. Merritt's phone revealed movement patterns investigators found difficult to ignore. Around the period of the disappearance, his device had traveled into areas consistent with the remote region where the McStay family was eventually buried. The evidence was not perfect. Cell tower data provides approximate locations rather than precise coordinates. Defense attorneys would later emphasize this limitation repeatedly. Nevertheless, investigators saw something significant. Among all the people connected to Joseph's business, Merritt's movements deserved closer examination. Detectives interviewed him multiple times. Experienced investigators often pay close attention not only to what suspects say but also to how their stories evolve over time. Memories naturally contain small inconsistencies. Fabricated stories often require larger adjustments as new evidence appears. According to investigators, Merritt's accounts of certain events shifted. Some timelines changed. Some explanations became less certain. None of these inconsistencies independently established guilt. Together, however, they contributed to an increasingly concerning pattern. Meanwhile, detectives continued exploring alternative suspects. They refused to build an entire homicide case around one individual without exhausting every other possibility. Business competitors were examined. Family members interviewed again. Friends reviewed. Former employees investigated. Random violence considered. Organized crime theories revisited. Each alternative gradually weakened beneath scrutiny. Evidence repeatedly circled back toward the same relationship. Joseph. His business. Charles Merritt. Investigators also examined the nature of that partnership. Like many business relationships, it had not always been smooth. Payments occasionally became disputed. Projects experienced delays. Financial disagreements emerged from time to time. Witnesses described increasing tension during periods before the disappearance. Prosecutors would later argue that Joseph had begun losing confidence in Merritt. Some evidence suggested Joseph intended to reduce or even end portions of their working relationship. If true, the consequences for Merritt could have been severe. Losing Joseph as a business partner meant losing income. It also risked exposing financial irregularities investigators were beginning to uncover. The possible motive gradually sharpened. Not revenge alone. Not simple anger. Money. Fear. Self-preservation. Detectives understood they still lacked one critical element. Direct physical evidence. No murder weapon had been recovered. No eyewitness existed. No confession. No DNA conclusively linking Merritt to the victim's remains. Many homicide investigations depend heavily upon forensic science. This case would depend upon something different. Circumstantial evidence. Some people misunderstand that term. Circumstantial evidence is not weak simply because it is indirect. Individual strands may appear fragile, but woven together, they can become extraordinarily powerful. A forged signature. Financial gain. Telephone records. Business activity. False explanations. Opportunity. Knowledge of the family's routines. Each piece alone might invite innocent interpretation. Together they began forming a narrative investigators believed pointed toward one conclusion. By 2014, detectives believed they had reached that point. Years of painstaking investigation had transformed scattered fragments into a coherent theory. The missing family case that once revolved around mysterious border crossings and speculative disappearances now centered upon a trusted business associate whose financial troubles, suspicious actions, and unexplained connections to critical evidence could no longer be ignored. On November 5, 2014, nearly 5 years after Joseph, Summer, Johnny, and Joey vanished from their quiet home in Fallbrook, Charles Chase Merritt was arrested and charged with the murders of all 4 members of the McStay family. For Joseph's relatives, the arrest brought mixed emotions. Relief that the investigation was finally moving forward. Pain because the suspect was not a stranger lurking in the shadows. According to prosecutors, the man responsible had been someone welcomed into Joseph's professional life. Someone who had shared conversations, business plans, and mutual trust. Someone who had known exactly what kind of family the McStays were. Yet despite the dramatic arrest, investigators understood the hardest battle still lay ahead. Finding a suspect and proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt are 2 entirely different challenges. Inside a courtroom, every assumption would be questioned. Every gap in the evidence would be exposed. And because the case rested almost entirely upon a chain of circumstantial evidence rather than direct forensic proof, prosecutors would have to persuade 12 jurors that those individual pieces formed only one reasonable conclusion. The search for the killer was ending. The fight to secure justice was only beginning. The arrest of Charles Chase Merritt marked the end of one chapter in the McStay investigation. It did not mark the end of the mystery. For prosecutors, making an arrest is only the beginning. A courtroom demands something very different from suspicion. Detectives may believe they know who committed a crime, but belief carries no legal weight. Every allegation must survive cross-examination. Every piece of evidence must withstand scrutiny. Every unanswered question becomes an opportunity for the defense to introduce doubt. The San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office understood immediately that this would be one of the most challenging homicide prosecutions in California. There was no eyewitness. No confession. No surveillance video showing the murders. No DNA recovered from the victims that conclusively identified the killer. No murder weapon had ever been found. The family had vanished almost 5 years before Merritt's arrest, and nearly 4 years had passed before their bodies were discovered. Time had erased countless opportunities for forensic recovery. Nature had become an accomplice to silence. The prosecution would have to rely upon something less dramatic but equally powerful. A carefully constructed chain of evidence. As trial preparations began, investigators spent thousands of hours organizing documents accumulated over nearly a decade. Bank statements filled entire boxes. Phone records stretched across timelines covering months before and after the disappearance. Business invoices, emails, handwritten notes, forensic reports, witness interviews, computer analyses, financial audits, and cell tower data were meticulously organized. The case had become enormous. Every document represented another fragment of the family's final days. Meanwhile, Merritt maintained his innocence. Through his attorneys, he denied murdering Joseph, Summer, Johnny, and Joey. The defense argued that investigators had become fixated on one suspect while ignoring other possibilities. Without direct forensic evidence placing Merritt at the murder scene, they insisted the government's theory rested on assumptions rather than certainty. It was an argument designed to appeal to one of the most important principles in American criminal law. Reasonable doubt. Jurors do not decide whether someone is probably guilty. They decide whether guilt has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. That distinction would define every day of the trial. When proceedings finally began, the courtroom carried an emotional weight that could not be ignored. Joseph's family sat only a short distance from the man prosecutors accused of destroying their lives. Years had passed since the disappearance, yet photographs of Johnny and Joey still showed smiling little boys frozen forever at the ages of 4 and 3. Their parents would never grow older in those pictures. Time had stopped for them in February 2010. The prosecution opened by presenting a narrative of calculated betrayal. According to their theory, financial desperation had driven Merritt toward murder. His gambling debts continued growing. His financial obligations mounted. Investigators believed Joseph had begun questioning aspects of their business relationship and was considering distancing himself from Merritt. If that happened, prosecutors argued, Merritt risked losing both income and access to money. Rather than face financial collapse, they alleged, he chose violence. Not only against Joseph. Against the entire family. The prosecution carefully introduced financial evidence. Forged company checks became one of the earliest focal points. Experts explained how Joseph's signatures had been examined and compared with known authentic examples. The differences, they testified, were significant. The checks, according to forensic document examiners, had not been signed by Joseph McStay. Yet they had benefited Merritt. Jurors listened as investigators reconstructed the flow of money after the family's disappearance. Invoices continued appearing. Business activity continued. The company seemed to function despite its owner having vanished. Prosecutors argued this was no coincidence. It represented an attempt to exploit Joseph's absence while delaying questions about where he had gone. Digital evidence followed. Computer specialists explained electronic records recovered during the investigation. Business communications. Electronic timestamps. Activity connected to company operations after Joseph disappeared. Every digital footprint added another layer to the prosecution's theory. Then came testimony regarding cell phone records. Experts carefully described how historical cell tower data could estimate the general movement of mobile devices. According to investigators, Merritt's phone traveled through areas broadly consistent with the remote desert where the McStay family would later be discovered. The defense immediately challenged those conclusions. Cell tower evidence, they argued, cannot pinpoint an exact location. Coverage areas overlap. Signals connect based upon multiple variables. Being within range of a tower does not prove someone stood at a specific location. Both sides understood the importance of this testimony. It illustrated one of the central tensions in modern criminal trials. Technology can reveal extraordinary amounts of information. It also possesses limitations. Jurors had to determine how much weight those records deserved. Witnesses who had known Joseph personally also testified. Friends described his devotion to his family. Business associates explained ongoing projects. Relatives spoke about his close relationships with his children. The prosecution wanted jurors to understand one critical point. Joseph had every reason to continue living his life. Nothing suggested he intended to abandon everything he loved. The defense offered an alternative perspective. They emphasized what investigators could not prove. No one had witnessed Merritt commit murder. No physical evidence directly connected him to the victim's remains. No blood belonging to the McStay family had been recovered from his property. No murder weapon linked to him had ever been found. Perhaps most importantly, prosecutors could not explain precisely where the murders occurred. The McStay home showed remarkably little evidence of extreme violence. The desert burial site revealed where bodies had been hidden but not necessarily where the family had died. Those unanswered questions became central to the defense strategy. If investigators could not identify the murder scene, how could they confidently identify the murderer? The prosecution responded by reminding jurors that homicide cases are rarely perfect. Criminals sometimes succeed in destroying direct evidence. Justice cannot depend solely upon eyewitnesses or DNA. Otherwise, carefully planned murders would frequently go unpunished. Instead, they argued, jurors should examine the entire picture rather than isolated pieces. Financial motive. Forged checks. Business control. Cell phone movements. False statements. Opportunity. Relationships. Viewed individually, each item might appear incomplete. Viewed together, prosecutors insisted, they pointed toward only one reasonable conclusion. The trial lasted for months. Day after day, jurors absorbed technical testimony, financial records, forensic analysis, and detailed timelines stretching back nearly a decade. The emotional burden remained heavy throughout. Photographs of the McStay family repeatedly reminded everyone inside the courtroom that this was not simply a dispute over business records. A mother. A father. 2 small boys. An entire future had disappeared. Outside the courthouse, public interest remained intense. Media organizations covered each major development. Legal analysts debated the strength of circumstantial evidence. Some observers believed prosecutors had assembled an overwhelming case. Others questioned whether the absence of direct forensic proof left too much uncertainty. The McStay case gradually became more than a homicide trial. It became a broader discussion about how modern criminal investigations establish truth when physical evidence has largely disappeared. After years of investigation and months of testimony, the case finally reached the jury. 12 ordinary citizens carried an extraordinary responsibility. They reviewed mountains of evidence, listened to countless hours of testimony, studied timelines, financial documents, forensic reports, and witness statements. Then they withdrew to deliberate. For Joseph's relatives, the waiting became almost unbearable. Nearly 10 years had passed since February 4, 2010. A decade of unanswered questions. A decade without birthdays. Without holidays shared together. Without closure. Now everything depended upon the judgment of 12 strangers. Whatever decision they reached would shape not only the future of Charles Merritt, but also the final chapter in one of California's most haunting family murder cases.